Hi, Marnie and Hasna. This is me, Emily. Excuse my voice. I am in Ohio right now, and I am a little bit allergic to all the things that are happening, all the trees and plants that are blooming. So my apologies. We got here yesterday. My husband and I took Lucy on her first flight, and we are here to spend Mother's Day with her grandma and her great grandma. So I am currently in my husband's childhood room, which just it's great. I love it. I love being here. Um, I can't wait to learn from your frameworks or your theory, I should say. And I look forward to providing you with some feedback and reading your feedback on mine. So let's get started. All right. There we go. So this is the integrated theory and portfolio presentation for 606. This is what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to first explain my integrated theory, key moments in development, which really helped me along with honing my theory, thinking more critically about it. I learned so much from this class, from the readings and the interviews and Dr. Fabianar's presentation. So everything really informed my theory, but I'm just going to pick key moments there. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I'm envisioning this to affect my future work. I'm found this class to be one of the most interesting classes we've taken so far in our program. And it's really had a pretty profound impact on me. So I'm going to explain that towards the end. So I'm going to go against the number one rule for PowerPoints, which is don't put too much information on the slides. And so let me just start with my initial theory. So sorry about this. I'm just going to walk us through this. My personal theory has 5 parts of it right now. This was my original theory for my grounded theory paper, and then I'm going to tell you about what I have been thinking about over the last few months since the submission of the grounded theory paper. So my personal theory is super critical after looking at it. I noticed that it's actually pretty anchored in negativity or criticality, and I'm working my way through that. I am new to critical inquiry, critical thinking. And so I tend to base my theorizing in a place of negativity. And so I am working on that. I just want to say that before we move on to my 5 points. So the first point here is that policies seek to address inequities when they are in the policymaker's best interests. So this is very similar to the tenet of critical race theory, which is interest convergence, specifically discussed by Bell, I believe in the 80s. But really what I've been learning about and what I'm seeing play out is that these policies that are supposed to be, life-changing, lifting people up, affecting marginalized populations, minoritized populations, are really only put into action when they are in the policymakers' best interest, when they serve them in some sort of way. The second part of my theory is that lacking clear policy assessment strategies weakens policy development and impact assessment, which makes generalization or generalizability difficult and systemic equity issues left unscathed is the word I used here. So basically what I'm saying is that there's lots of policies out there without a clear, transparent, well-organized assessment strategy attached to them before they are implemented. So I don't know about you guys, but I saw a ton of really interesting frameworks when we created our equity framework matrix, but very little clarity into how these were going to be assessed. Like, how will the impact of these be measured? How do we know if they're working, and who's deciding if they're being impactful in a positive way? So my second point here is really focused on assessment. Like, let's make sure that when we are creating policies, we are also attaching a clear assessment strategy. So that way the policies are able to be measured. We're able to see this. We're able to tell if they have made an impact or not, and what type of impact. My third point is that decision makers that are not inclusive of the population's policies intend to affect produce policies often rooted solely in the perceived understanding of educational issues from the perspective of outsiders and individuals in position of power. So a few really important points here within this idea is that when policies are not inclusive of the populations they tend to affect, these policies then are addressing issues of that the policymakers perceive or understand, if that makes sense. So there's a really big difference between when I see a problem in my classroom versus how a policy might be created to address that problem, because I am not being included in the creation of the policy, if that makes sense. So, and that's a huge issue with me in general, is that I see a lot of policies that are not inclusive of practitioners. And so these policies are solely based on the policymakers' perceptions of the issues, but when in reality, the issues might be different. So that's what this point is really about, is, hey, we need to flip this. We need to include people who are actually on the ground, okay? And I think that Dr. Fabianar calls them street level bureaucrats. We need to include these individuals in the creation of the policies. Otherwise, these policies might miss, right? They might be created to address issues that are very different on the ground than what those in power perceive them to be. The fourth one is the inclusion of policy entrepreneurs outside of the world of education broadens the potential solutions to address inequities. However, it also dilutes the educational focus on educational inequities themselves. So this is something that I was super skeptical about from the beginning, is, hey, who are these people? Who are these policy entrepreneurs? Why are they involved? This kind of goes back to my first point of, hey, what is their interest? How does this serve them? And so when I want to note the fact that the inclusion of policy entrepreneurs can widen the scope and the potential inequities, but it also dilutes the focus on education, because a lot of these policy entrepreneurs are not educators. So this is something that I see as a pretty important tension that I want to continue to revisit. And my fifth point, again, I apologize about my nose and my voice today. My mother-in-law has like 6 cats, 2 dogs, and 3 horses. So, which I think is phenomenal, but I'm just really allergic. Okay, so side note. My fifth point is without identifying and dismantling core social and economic inequities sustained by public policies, educational policies focused on inequities will continue to struggle. So here, I'm really talking about the merging of public policy and educational policy, right? Where we're thinking about, hey, the issue is our schools, when we actually need to step back and say, well, the issue is the fact that we have social policy in place that lead to, the poverty that our students face. So we're looking at our schools being the context for change, but we really need to make sure that we're looking at the marriage between social, public, and educational policy, so that we are supporting our students holistically instead of just focusing on their education, because so much of who they are and what they bring to education is based outside of schools. So this was my personal theory as articulated in my grounded theory paper. And so how I have revised my personal theory moving forward, and this is still under a lot of revision. For my first point is policies moving forward should include attention to the healing of previously negatively affected populations. One of the frameworks that I included in my matrix focuses intently on healing. as related to equity. And so what I want to focus on here is, hey, we have done a lot of harm to populations because we create policies in the best interest of the policymakers. And so how can we rectify some of that harm? Of course, not to, erase it, but let's focus on helping populations heal. And so again, that does not mean that we tell these populations how they should heal, but we should include members of these populations to help and when I say us, I'm talking about people who are creating policy, including members of those populations to help lead the policies to create sections on healing, attention to healing, I should say. The second point is which is what I said last slide, is, hey, let's make sure that policy development and assessment strategies should be transparent and open to adaptation by including members of affected populations. My third point, it's getting a little repetitive, but let's make sure that we are inclusive of the populations policies intend to affect. We cannot make policies about people without including them and centering their voices and making sure they are in leadership positions within policy creation, development, and assessment. It just blows my mind that this is something that isn't a given. So this is just a repeated theme throughout my personal theory. The fourth point, I'm still reflecting on this because I struggle with how, for the fifth point, the merging of different policy sectors and the inclusion of a variety of people's voices and how positive that can be. Yet this dilution portion really catches me. Excuse me. And I really want to continue reflecting on this. So if you have any thoughts, or I would just love to, in your feedback to me, I want to know everything you think about this, because I really struggle. I struggle with this. I go back and forth, and I still haven't landed on a specific opinion or a solid opinion about this. And then the fifth point is I have questions, so we need to, without identifying and dismantling core and economic inequities sustained by public policy, how are we going to maybe not identify, identification is easier, but how are we going to dismantle these when these inequities serve the interests of the dominant culture? So where does this dismantling happen? How does this dismantling happen? And of course, I do think I'm going to go back to my favorite point, the inclusion, the centering, the making sure that members of negatively affected populations are in positions of power and leadership and decision-making. That can help with this dismantling, because this interest conversion piece here is really the backbone of policy. And we need to make sure to destroy this, because if we don't do that, then these policies will continue to be created that actually don't serve the best interests of those that the policies, quote, intend to affect. So this is my revised personal theory. It is ongoing and it will forever be ongoing. Okay, so here are some key moments of development. The readings really had a profound impact on me, especially Heck, Kirst, Anion, of course, Diem and Young, and Hochschild. I hope I pronounced all of these last names correctly, but thinking about who benefits and who loses, being very critical in this, looking past just the noise and the talk of the policy and looking at the assessment and the impact. So who is benefiting here and who is losing and why? Thinking about the relationship between policy development, and policy assessment. That relationship that Heck outlined was really important for me, looking at how connected those need to be. Of course, centering the population policy intends to serve. Everybody was talking about that. All of the readings were saying this is a necessity, okay? This is how we used to do things. This is how we're currently doing things. And when we or designing policies moving forward, we need to center the populations that the policy intends to serve. Man, that cursed article took me a long time to get through, but it really, really helped me understand the process, the policy process. So I need to give credit where credit is due, because I did not understand this at all before, and I still have a very limited understanding. The relationship between different policy sectors had a great impact on me as well. Anyan, of course, is always so enlightening, and I was able to broaden my scope, or my lens. So looking specifically at education, taking a step back and saying, okay, these students aren't meeting, quote, these benchmarks. We know this is problematic. So let's focus on education. No. We need to take a step back, look at the policy sectors, the public policy sectors that are in place, public policies that are in place that affect those students that are going to the schools that we are then creating policies for. And so looking at that relationship was really powerful for me. I loved all of the interviews, especially Dr. Nellam's. He called out the need for educators in the policy sector, and that hit home for me. That really stood out. All of the interviews were phenomenal. And then being able to create that matrix and revise it and discuss this with peers helped me see how frameworks in different realms, not just education, used varying focuses on equity. So they were able to define equity in different ways. I looked at frameworks that focused on the healthcare for minoritized women, for maternal healthcare, and the innovative ideas in that framework were so powerful. I thought, okay, I need to include innovation in my theory going forward. Healing as part of the national equity frameworks. Moving forward, I really want to make sure healing is part of it. So just looking at all these different frameworks helped me evolve my understanding of equity and policy. And so finally, to end this presentation is my utility for theory in future work. And this is really under construction. But I have spent a lot of time reflecting on the connection between 606 and 610, specifically policy and research for policy. So part of my, like a really interesting nugget that I have pulled from my research in 610 is how it's difficult for non-tenure track professors or part-time professors to enact equitable practices, because they themselves are existing, working, living in a very inequitable system for them. And so you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like what do you need? What are basic needs? Food, housing, safety, all this stuff, working your way up to self-actualization, which in my mind is innovation, creativity, the implementation of equity work within your practice if you are not currently doing that. But how are these instructors supposed to get to the very top if they don't have their basic needs met by this system? For example, the part-time faculty system is a contract position. So you don't know if you'll have the means to be able to put food on your table, to be able to pay your bills until the semester starts. And so thinking about how can my research affect policy? How can my research maybe affect or at least investigate policy in the community college sector, specifically towards the hiring practices between part-time, full-time, tenure track, non-tenure track positions, and how living in such an inequitable system then affects your ability to include equitable practices in your own classroom. So it's also this class has made me aware that I do have a voice when it comes to policy, and I should be using it. And how can I use it? How can I show up to department meetings? How can I have a discussion with my dean, my chairs, and talk about problems that I'm seeing and inequitable issues within required assessments, for example? And I didn't, as a part-time faculty member, I've never really felt like I had access to these spaces, the ability to use my voice in these spaces. And you know, I'm a white educator. I'm a white female middle class educator. I come from a place of a lot of privilege. So if I'm feeling like that, I can imagine that other instructors, more marginalized instructors for whatever part of their identity, um, may struggle with that even more. And so that has made me very reflective on my own position and position of power and how I should be using my voice, and how I can be doing that. I'm in a state of transition. I moved to Colorado a year and a half ago. I've been still teaching my classes in California because they're still online. So I'm in a state of transition between finding, still teaching in California and wanting to find a job here in Colorado. So I've been thinking about policies, how they change state to state, and also how positions change state to state. And then do I just want to seek out an instructor position moving forward? That is my goal, and I love teaching. But is there a position that maybe combines a little bit of teaching and policy? Maybe it's a little bit more of an administrative leadership position. So this class has given me the confidence to start seeking out more varied positions for myself in the future. Okay, so this was my presentation. Hope it was okay and that you both have an understanding of what I'm thinking about in terms of equity and policy. I would love your feedback. I know you're required, but I am so looking forward to it. Thank you so much for bearing with me as I get through this in a state of allergy. But I also, and I forgot to mention this at the beginning, since I am in Ohio, I'm in a new place. I looked up the land that I'm on. I wanted to pay homage to um, the Sioux, Cherokee, and Iroquois tribes here in New Lebanon, Ohio. And also say that my husband and I we met in undergrad. We went to a school called Miami University, which is about an hour southwest of here, not Miami, Florida, but Miami of Ohio. And Miami, the school, was named after the Native American Miami tribe. And so I just want to ground my presentation in that and end my presentation giving thanks and recognition to those peoples. So thank you all so much for watching. Hope you all are so good. Happy Mother's Day to you both. And I look forward to your feedback. Thank you.